Hey there, my name is Matt Wade, an Office 365 MVP and a bit of an AI enthusiast. And relevant to this video, I'm a speaker at Microsoft's Business Application Summit 2018. The BizApp Summit is like the best way to learn about Microsoft Flow, Power Apps, and Power BI from experts in the field and also the product teams themselves. And I happen to be presenting a little bit on Microsoft Flow. So in this session, I'm going to be taking a bit of a different view on Microsoft Flow from the typical user. We're going to be placing a chatbot interface in front of Flow. Now, while it may not be immediately obvious why you'd want to do that, I'll make sure you walk away with some great use cases and inspiration. So to give a quick summary, a chatbot can centralize your Flow experience into one endpoint that uses everyday language. So the bot removes the need for your colleagues to know where your flows are and how to kick them off. The interface is also natural. People request or say they need to do something in vernacular language, and the bot kicks off the correct flow using some slick but easy to use Azure services. Also, this video is a little more in-depth than the in-person one I'm presenting at BizApp Summit, so just fair warning, but you'll walk away with a lot more usable little nuggets. So if you're not familiar with Flow, it's one of the many applications that comes with an Office 365 license, as well as other Microsoft license options such as Dynamics CRM. Compared to its predecessor, SharePoint Designer, which I know a lot of people love, Flow is much more user-friendly. I am not a developer, so that really makes me happy. And it has a slick drag-and-drop user interface and built-in connections to more than 200 services. Many of which are Microsoft, but most of them actually are not. So in the same flow, you can connect to and kick off processes in SharePoint, Salesforce CRM, Zendesk, DocuSign, and MailChimp. Now, I'm not saying I have a real use case for that, but by all means, if you do, go right ahead if you want to try it. And for those services that don't have built-in connectors, including on-premises servers and local applications that you may have, a developer can build a connector, and the connector can be used by anyone else in the organization. So for a little development effort to customize, you can provide a lot of benefits to everyday users who can't code. So your big takeaway here is that Flow doesn't require 15 years as a NASA-grade computer engineer to use it. Any normal employee with a little bit of interest can start playing around with task automation today, without much experience. So that brings us to the problem that we're trying to solve, or maybe, it's better termed inefficiency, since Flow is really just so great at what it does. If you're already using Flow, you'll likely already know that your flows are kind of all over the place. While your flows all live in Flow, their triggers, the things that kick off a flow, must be based on another app unless it's something you've built to be manual. So Flow's integration with other apps means that there's usually a trigger is pulled when something happens in that app. So it requires some training of people using it. They need to know when and where to kick off that flow, what input, if anything, is required, and what the consequences are for using that flow. For example, a commonly used trigger action is when a user uploads a file into a SharePoint library. The user has to know which library kicks off that flow and why they would use it. The governance around the automation has to be strong, otherwise things can get confusing. You may end up spending more time getting around to errors and mistakes than the automation actually saves you. But a chatbot can bring all the automation into one place, a box where you talk to a bot. The user doesn't have to know how the flow works, they just provide the input that the bot requests. As long as the bot's easy to find and people are regularly reminded to go to it for certain tasks, there's really no net training necessary for your colleagues. So an easy way to get traction is by placing your bot in a pop-up box on your intranet homepage. You need to submit an expense, ask for time off, update a field service request in CRM, just ping the bot and the process is automated. So let's take a look at a demo to make this a little bit more real. For this demo, we're using AtBot, a freemium bot available in the Microsoft Teams store. For full transparency, I work on this product, but I do love it and I think it's a great tool. There's a free version of AtBot, but we're actually using a licensed version since it provides some major feature improvements. And just a heads up, this is actually a video demo, but it is completely real. I do prefer to use videos because it's much easier to talk to a video than to jump between talking to a bot and then talking to you, but there's no smoke and mirrors here. This all works actually, as displayed. Now let's say that I am a typical user and I have a bit of an issue, an IT issue that I need to bring up. Well, I've been trained that I need to go to the IT department's SharePoint site and use a new bot that they have. That is my entry point now for all trouble tickets or any sort of remedy issues that I have to go through. So let's say I start from my SharePoint Online home and I go to IT. They have this new beautiful communication site built in SharePoint Online. There's a lot of good information there. I can scroll through, but it's not what I'm looking for. So I've been told, go to this bot. It's called Ask IT. It's in the bottom right. I bring up the little box and Ask IT gives me a little welcome and I say, hey, in natural language, I need to connect to a network printer. Now let's just assume though, that you don't just need to connect to a printer, you're also not sure which printer to connect to or how. You don't know the names of them or anything like that. So the bot actually comes back with a required input field, which is, hey, do you want to use color or black and white? Which is relevant, right? So I'm going to select black and white, and you'll see that I'm using a user here called Bill Williamson. And what's happening in the background is this is now kicking off a flow. You'll see that I actually the bot greeted me as Bill. It's pulling that from the Office 365, basically the Office graph connector in Flow. And then it's also pulling my location because, hey, I may not want to print where I am just because my office says, location in Azure Directory or Azure Active Directory says I sit in the New York office. Maybe I want to print someplace else like London to somebody else or I'm traveling. But I am actually going to say that I do want to print here. And it's going to now run through a couple of things. Well, it's actually pulling right now from a simple SharePoint list, a complete collection of all of the printers that exist in the organization and which floor they're on, in which building, and whether they're black and white or color. This is a simple query filter, effectively, that Flow is doing through a SharePoint connector and saying, hey, which of these items is available as an option, and comes back with a dynamic option of choice. So I'm going to say floor 7, that's the floor that I happen to sit on. And it's now doing another filter query and saying, great, I found these printers. It gives me the list of printers. There happen to be only 2 black and white printers on my floor. And then it says, okay, now it's time to actually talk about the instructions. So one of the best practices that we've really determined is to try to keep people in the chat as long as you can. So in this case, I've actually provided the answer in a Flow connector, which is just a reply, send a reply via AtBot in a Flow connector that says, here are the prescribed steps to get a printer connected to your computer. But if you're having issues, here's a URL to the official source. And the official source is the Microsoft Windows 10 Add a Printer page so that I don't have to upkeep some sort of knowledge base internally. Now, after a short delay, maybe you'd want to keep it as a few minutes so the person can actually do some, troubleshooting. In this case, it's just a few seconds. It asks me, hey, were you able to get that connected? I'm going to say yes. Now, if I had said no, it'll actually ask me for any issues that I had or errors to report. And then it's going to say, hey, great, happy to hear that, blah, 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 blah. What's happening in the background is that from the very beginning, this actually opened up a ServiceNow ticket. ServiceNow is one of the more popular IT remedy support ticket systems out there. And you see, this is the actual ticket that gets created. Once it's created, it automatically knows what it's about because it's pre-populated in the flow. It creates the ticket, and then when I'm done, at the very end when I said, yes, this worked out, it closes it. Because really, IT should still have the metrics. Just because you're automating this work doesn't mean that it's not still important and you shouldn't still have an idea of what the data is out there. Also, the IT team, even though they're automating this stuff, they kind of deserve credit for the fact that they automated it, right? So these tickets keep a good running history of what's going on. So this is a very, very powerful example of, go through and start automating your highest value trouble issues that come in through an IT ticket system or through a tech support system for customers on the outside. Very, very powerful. And no, you don't have to go through and automate every single one of them. That doesn't really make any sense, but pick those high value, go through your remedy system right now and find out what the top 15, 20, 25, 50 most common ticket types that come through. Figure out how to automate them and automate them because it'll be worth your time. All those tier 1 people that answer phones now will be able to rise up to do tier 2 or maybe do project work elsewhere in the company. Now, if we move on to the next idea here, in case you're wondering, let's take a look at what that flow actually looks like. So this is what the flow looks like here. We're using AtBot's natural language trigger, so it'll kick off whenever Azure says the language that came in means kick off this flow. And you'll see that I'm working with a couple variables, getting the user profile so I can be more personal by using the person's name. So when you saw Bill or you saw the location that they happen to sit in, and I create that ServiceNow ticket from the very start. Like I said, all of the replies and input requests that you saw in the demo are actually actions in the flow. But let's talk a little bit about bot architecture basics first, because that shows you how the power is there, but how did we make that happen? So a good bot is basically a 3-legged stool. It's got to understand input, it's got to kick off tasks based on that input, and if the user isn't kicking off tasks, the language that came in is not a command. It needs to be able to answer knowledge questions if the input is more of a question. Now, in the Microsoft Cloud, you build bots using bot services and bot framework. The understanding comes from Azure's language understanding intelligence service, which we call LUIS, and the knowledge comes from Azure's QnA Maker service. Okay. Now these are all part of Azure's cognitive services suite. Okay. When it comes to logic, the doing part, bots are usually developed in C# or Node.js. But in this case, we built AtBot to integrate with Flow. So our triggers and actions in Flow are basically middlemen between Flow and the chat experience. But how does AtBot know how to react to natural language? Well, that's where LUIS comes in. This is the actual LUIS app that goes with the earlier demo. Each flow is one action, and each LUIS app has an intent for that action. The intent contains utterances. Basically, you're providing different phrasing for how you could say the same thing. And once you train the model, LUIS learns about the phrasing, the synonyms, and the syntax, other things like that. And this is where that whole term machine learning comes in. You can even create variables out of some of the words in an utterance. So you can grab the printer type in this case. If the user had said, I want to connect to a color printer, there's no need to ask for the clarification that you saw in the demo, because in the demo, I didn't say what type of printer I wanted. So this is really powerful. Consider if you told the bot, schedule a meeting with John Smith, Sally Jones, and Andrew Erickson sometime tomorrow in the main conference room to talk about budget projections. So you have 4 value types there: people, date, location, and subject. If the user provides all 4, the bot knows everything it needs to know and it'll kick off that flow. If it's missing anything, the bot can ask solely for what it doesn't know. So the big takeaway here is just how easy it is to use these services. LUIS and its cousin QnA Maker are nothing more than 2-column tables with words. You don't need to be a developer to own these things. So internal organizations, like the lines of business, can be in charge of their bots in the same way that they run SharePoint sites. And AtBot lets you create multiple custom branded bots so you can have as many as you need for all your use cases. And the power here is that we took the hard part, the programming of the logic of a bot, and made it easy. So now that's just as simple or similarly simple to using LUIS or QnA Maker, because you use Flow, and Flow is actually easy to be used by a general user. But let's talk real world here. There are a ton of use cases out there to put this to work. Personally, I think customer service and tech support are major ones. You can effectively automate tier 1 tech support out of existence and only raise an issue to a human if necessary. But any internal organization can benefit from improved knowledge management. So think about the commonly asked questions that any HR or finance team get. Why answer the same questions over and over and over again when you can just automate them? So get those people who answer constant emails and phone calls and IMs all day long and get them back on high-value projects. And answers to questions can actually point users to kicking off flows. So consider someone asking how much time off they have. They're really probably trying to ask how they request time off. So when the bot answers with how many hours or how many vacation hours that the user has, the bot can then say, oh, by the way, did you want to request time off? So if the user says yes, the flow gets kicked off. The user provides the dates, the flow puts the request for approval with the manager, it schedules the time in the HR system, deducts the hours in the HR system, sets up the users out of Office and Outlook, and blocks their calendar in the Outlook calendar, right? So you're using the bot to hold the person's hand and even guess what they really wanted to do, making that whole process so much more slick and easy to use. Now, I happen to be a Bank of America customer, and just last month they launched their new chatbot service called Erica. Now, I don't get any sort of payment for this. I'm just pointing out a really good example here where BOA has gone all in on self-service this way. So the mobile app actually has a persistent button, so you can't go anywhere without seeing Erica. And I was pleasantly surprised because I actually used it for some questions I had related to my banking and my credit card, and it answered them, to the extent that I needed. So chatbots may seem futuristic, and everybody talks about them at conferences, but nobody ever actually sees them in the real world. But they're real, and they're being implemented widespread by really major organizations. Now let's talk about one of the issues that Microsoft customers need to solve most. The ultimate use case really is forms. You'll find that a strategic use of Power Apps, Flow, and a chatbot will provide the best experience for your colleagues. Power Apps for the more complex forms, and a chatbot for the ones that only need a few pieces of input. And Flow works in the background behind both of those tools. So the more processes you automate with the bot, the easier it is to get the answer. Remember that Power Apps will require the user to know where to go find the form. But you can use the bot to point people to Power Apps since the form has its own link. So the bot still is your central form resource regardless of the tool you use to garner the form input. Now this really may help as you start weaning yourself off of InfoPath and SharePoint Designer. If you let them stay, you're going to regret it. So now's the time to start to jump on exciting productivity technology like bots. The longer you wait, the more you're going to regret it, since support for Designer and InfoPath sunsets in 2023, which, frankly, is not that far away. So where do you actually access your bot? We talked about what the use cases here are, but where can you get to it? The nice thing about bots is they're natively available in Microsoft Teams, right? So, that's great, but not a whole lot of people are in Teams yet compared to some other services. But thanks to a service called Direct Line, you can pretty much pop your bot up in almost any web app, any web application, so SharePoint Online, any different type of intranet you might be using, or pretty much any authenticated web app that connects to O365. And in this case, this authenticated experience can know who you are and pull information about you. You're logged in to the service. Now, if you want a more public-facing bot, you can have it pop up in a website, in a mobile app, in social media like Twitter DM or Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, or anything else with an API, thanks to that Direct Line connection. But thanks to Microsoft Teams, if you are using it or you're thinking about it, from day one, your bot can be available on all major operating systems with no support issues. So bots are made for Teams, Teams is made for Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, right? So out of the box, your bot can be available and in somebody's pocket tomorrow if you want it to be, thanks to the power of Teams. So I'm going to wrap up there. If you're interested in trying out a chatbot interface with Flow and your business processes, try AtBot. You can test it out with a free 30-day trial and have a real working bot, up and running in a matter of days. We have a really handy Jumpstart guide, so go ahead and download that to make the process easy and make the most of your trial. I included a link to that in the description, and if you have any questions or issues, feel free to reach out to hello@atbot.io or simply hit our website at atbot.io, also in the description. So thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel for some more great AI and bot best practices and use cases and some more inspiration. Take care.